It's weird, right? How much our brains just kind of fill in the gaps.
It is.
Like, you remember those busts of Marty Jobson we saw? They looked identical at first.
Yeah.
But one was covered in Vanna Black, that stuff that basically eats light.
Oh, right.
It makes it look like, I don't know, a hole in reality or something.
Like a void, yeah.
It makes you think about all this stuff we think we see, but actually don't.
Exactly. Our brains are constantly making assumptions, constructing a whole picture from just a few pieces.
And that brings us to today's deep dive. We're talking Clearer, Closer, Better by Emily Balcetis.
Oh, fantastic book.
It's all about, well, how our eyes and brains work together.
Right.
And the really cool part is that she says we can kind of take control of that process.
We can actually steer our perception to help us reach our goals.
Exactly. And that's perfect for you, our listener, who wants to understand all this heady stuff without, getting a PhD in neuroscience.
Consider this your crash course in the power of perspective.
Right. Our mission today is to explore how this whole perspective thing can be a real game changer.
How we can use it to achieve what we want.
Whether it's learning a new skill, saving for retirement.
Or even just, making better choices in our daily lives.
And we're not just pulling this out of thin air.
Yeah.
This book has gotten some serious praise.
Oh, yeah. Big names like Adam Alter, Amy Cuddy.
Adam Grant, the who's who of behavioral science.
They've all given it the thumbs up, which says a lot.
Okay, so chapter 1 dives into the whole goal-setting thing. And for me, this brought back some vivid memories of my high school band.
Oh.
We called ourselves Goldfinger. We had, zero self-awareness.
I love it.
We were convinced we'd be sharing the stage with the actual band Goldfinger at this local festival.
No way.
We thought they were just dying to hear our, shall we say, unique horn section. Let's just say they weren't exactly lining up to collaborate. It was a harsh lesson in how easily our initial goals can be, well, a little delusional.
It's easy to get caught up in the excitement of a new idea and overestimate our chances.
Right. Fast forward a few years, and I'm tackling a new, potentially equally misguided goal. Learning to play the drums.
Oh, wow.
Now, picture this. Tiny Manhattan apartment. A baby who thinks drumsticks are teething toys.
Okay, I see where this is going.
My complete lack of drumming experience and coordination that makes a toddler look like a professional dancer.
It's a bold goal, for sure.
But I had my reasons. Partly, it was just a personal challenge.
Sure.
Something for me, in the midst of diapers and sleep deprivation.
Yeah, I get it.
But it was also about my son, Maddie. I wanted to expose him to music early on.
It's never too early.
There's this Canadian research that shows even 6-month-olds can pick up on basic music theory.
That's amazing.
And that parents playing music with their kids makes a huge difference.
That makes sense, right? That interaction, that shared experience.
And there's even a German study that found kids who make music together are actually more pro-social later in life.
Really? That's fascinating.
Yeah, they're more helpful and cooperative. So maybe all that drumming will turn Maddie into a little saint.
You never know.
Of course, I was also aware of the whole New Year's resolution phenomenon.
Yes.
We set these big goals, all gung-ho, gone. I think some poll said only a third of people actually stick with their resolutions.
It's tough. We have the best intentions, but then life gets in the way.
So my first attempts at drumming were, well, let's call them improvisational.
I'm intrigued.
Picture me next to Maddie, banging on an upside-down silicone bowl with a whisk.
That's creative.
He mostly just gummed the whisk, to be honest. It was not exactly a Grammy-winning performance. And the thing is, just wanting to play wasn't enough. I was terrible. It sounded like a herd of elephants tap dancing on a tin roof.
Ouch.
I tried pep talks, visualizing myself as the next Ringo Starr, but it felt like I was constantly fighting an uphill battle.
And that's often a sign that the strategies we're using are actually draining our mental energy.
It's exhausting just trying to psych yourself up all the time.
Right, and it can be counterproductive.
Balcetis talks about this study with women who were trying to diet.
Okay.
They were all told not to think about chocolate, but one group was told to just let those thoughts come and go.
Interesting.
You think the women who were allowed to think about chocolate would be the ones raiding the pantry, right?
Yeah, makes sense.
But nope, it was the ones who tried so hard to suppress those thoughts who ended up eating more later.
Wow.
It's like the whole pink elephant thing.
Yeah.
The more you tell yourself not to think about it, the more it takes over your brain.
That's a mental boomerang.
Exactly. And then there's this other study that really blew my mind.
Tell me about it.
They had people crossing out the letter E on a page. Super simple, right?
Yeah, sounds pretty mindless.
But here's the catch. They told some people that the color of the paper either yellow or white, would affect their mental energy.
Like drain their attention or boost it.
Exactly. But the thing is, the color didn't actually do anything.
It was all about their perception.
And the results were crazy. The people who thought the yellow paper would make them tired, they gave up faster, made more mistakes.
Even though the task was the same for everyone.
It's like they'd convinced themselves they were mentally exhausted before they even started.
The power of belief, right. It can really influence our performance.
So the big takeaway from Chapter 1 is that having a goal isn't enough. We need strategies that work with our brains, not against them.
We need to find ways to make the journey feel manageable, not overwhelming.
So how do we actually do that? Chapter 2 is all about finding those effective strategies.
And Balcetis starts off with this incredible story about Dale Chihuly.
The glass artist.
Yes. His work is absolutely breathtaking.
It's like he defies gravity with glass.
Yeah.
But his story is even more remarkable than his art.
Oh.
He was already a huge success, his sculptures in museums all over the world.
Wow.
But then, a car accident left him blind in one eye. And a few years later, he dislocated his shoulder so badly, he couldn't even hold the tools to work with glass.
That's devastating.
You'd think that would be the end. Right. But instead of giving up, he changed his entire approach.
How so?
He essentially became the architect of his art. He would come up with the concepts, the designs, and then direct a team of glassblowers to execute his vision.
That's incredible. He found a way to turn a setback into an opportunity.
And it made me realize I needed to do the same with my drumming. My initial strategy was basically just banging away, hoping something good would happen.
That's a recipe for frustration.
So I did something I should have done from the start. I asked for help.
Who did you turn to?
My father-in-law, Pete. He's been a drummer for, like, 40 years. A total pro.
The perfect mentor.
I told him I wanted to learn a song, and in my infinite wisdom, I picked Bullet the Blue Sky by U2.
Ambitious.
It's got this amazing driving beat. I was all fired up.
I can imagine.
But Pete, bless his heart, gently suggested it might not be the best choice for a beginner.
What made it so difficult?
The coordination, apparently. The drummer's hands are flying all over the place, 16 notes in a single beat.
Sounds intense.
Like juggling chainsaws while riding a unicycle. Pete compared it to a novice cook trying to make baked Alaska as their first dish.
Ouch. Maybe not the best starting point.
Right. So he steered me towards something a little more manageable. Your Love by The Outfield.
Oh, a classic.
It's got a simple rock beat, and the drummer barely even plays for the first minute.
Even that was probably a challenge at first.
Oh, absolutely.
Ah.
I was secretly hoping for something cooler, something I could brag about learning.
But sometimes you have to start with the basics.
And that actually ties into one of the key principles Balcetis highlights in this chapter.
The importance of setting appropriately challenging goals.
Right. Not too hard, not too easy.
That sweet spot where you're pushing yourself, but not setting yourself up for failure.
And she gives this example of 3M, the company behind Post-it notes and all that.
Right.
They have this goal that 25% of their revenue has to come from products that didn't even exist 5 years ago.
Wow, that's ambitious.
But it works. It keeps them innovating, constantly pushing the boundaries.
It's a great example of a challenging but achievable goal.
So my initial song choice was definitely not in that sweet spot. But Your Love was perfect.
How did you approach learning it?
I started super basic, just focusing on the bass drum and snare drum.
One step at a time.
My right arm was just hanging there, waiting for its turn.
Smart.
Well,
Building those foundational skills.
it was slow, but I was making progress, and that's what kept me motivated.
Small victories are so important.
Now, setting the right goals is one thing, but staying focused on them is a whole other challenge.
Especially in our hyper-distracted world.
Chapter 3 is all about that, keeping your eyes on the prize.
And Balcetis brings up the study about distracted driving.
They put people in a driving simulator, and just having a conversation made them 50% more likely to crash.
Just talking. That's scary.
Yeah, it's like our brains can only handle so much input at once.
We have limited cognitive resources.
And Balcetis finds this really cool historical example of how to combat that.
Who is it?
This guy named Joseph Petzval. He lived in the 1800s, and he revolutionized photography.
How so?
He invented this new kind of lens with a really wide aperture.
What's so special about that?
Well, back then, taking portraits was a real ordeal. People had to sit perfectly still for like 30 minutes.
Oh, wow.
But Petzval's lens let in so much more light that exposures could be much shorter.
So people didn't have to pose for ages.
Exactly. But here's the thing. His lens also created this really interesting visual effect.
What kind of effect?
It made the subject in the foreground super sharp, while the background was all blurry and soft.
Oh, I've seen that.
It's still super popular in photography today. They even had a Kickstarter to revive his lens.
Cool.
But the really interesting part is that this visual effect, this open aperture, as Balcetis calls it, is all about focus.
It highlights the main subject and minimizes distractions.
And that's what we need to do with our goals. We need to narrow our focus, like Petzvall's lens, and bring our target into sharp relief.
Tuning out all the background noise.
This idea of narrowed visual attention really comes to life in Chapter 4.
Okay, I'm curious.
It starts with me being in New York during this crazy blizzard.
Oh, wow.
I was supposed to give a talk, ironically, about visual attention.
That's funny.
And while I'm there, I meet this guy, Jeff Provenzano.
Who's he?
He's a professional skydiver. And not just any skydiver.
What do you mean?
This guy jumps off cliffs in wingsuits, base jumps off skyscrapers, once even landed on a moving jet ski after jumping out of a plane.
That's insane.
Yeah, he's a total daredevil. But the story that really blew my mind was about him and his buddy, Luke Akins.
What did they do?
They were planning to jump out of a plane at 25,000 feet and land on a net.
Wait, without parachutes?
Without parachutes.
Greatly, right?
That's beyond crazy.
They had this whole team of experts, like stunt coordinators, lighting designers, even NASA engineers.
They needed all the help they could get.
They built this massive net, figured out how to cushion the impact, the whole 9 yards.
It's like a real-life action movie. But the part that really got me was how Akins was going to find this relatively small net in the middle of the desert while falling at terminal velocity.
Yeah, that's a needle in a haystack situation.
They came up with this system using these lights called PAPIs, the same kind they use at airports for guiding planes.
Okay.
If Akins was on target, the lights would look white. If he was off course, they'd turn red.
So it's all about visual cues.
Jeff, the skydiver, put it perfectly. White, you're good. Red, you're dead.
Yikes, that's high stakes.
And during practice jumps, they realized the lights were actually too close together.
From that height, they'd be tiny.
And Akins was focusing so intently on the inner circle of lights that he was losing track of the outer ones, which gave him a wider sense of his position.
So his focus was actually too narrow.
They had to adjust the lights, making the target smaller and more precise.
And what happened on the actual jump?
So picture this. July 30th, 2016. Akins steps out of the plane at 25,000 feet, no parachute.
I'm getting nervous just thinking about it.
His heart rate is through the roof, but he's remarkably calm, focused on those lights.
Those lights are literally his lifeline.
About 300 feet above the net, he does a backflip to land on his back.
To distribute the impact.
Exactly. And 2 minutes and 9 seconds after jumping out of a perfectly good airplane, he hits the net.
He survived.
He survived. It was incredible. It just shows how powerful narrowed focus can be.
He literally focused on his target and shut out everything else.
And it's not just for skydivers. In Chapter 5, Balcetis shows how elite athletes use this same principle all the time.
Like who?
Well, there's Joan Benoit Samuelson, the first woman to win an Olympic marathon.
Oh, yeah, I remember her.
Her strategy was brilliant. During the race, she'd pick out a runner ahead of her and focus on just overtaking that one person.
So she broke down this massive goal into smaller, more manageable steps.
Exactly. She was constantly setting these mini goals, keeping her motivated and focused.
It's like she was tricking her brain into thinking the finish line was always just a little bit further.
And it worked. She won the whole thing. And it's not just her. I talked to this elite running team in Brooklyn, and they all use similar techniques.
Fascinating.
They might be aware of the other runners, but their focus is always on the next target, the next step.
It's like they're narrowing their field of vision to just what's essential.
Now, here's another interesting thing. Our bodies can actually affect how we perceive effort.
What do you mean?
Chapter 6 gets into this. There's research showing that heavier people, or people who are tired, tend to see the same distance as being farther away.
Really?
Like if you're carrying a heavy backpack, a hill might look steeper than if you're empty-handed.
That makes sense, I guess.
And it's not just distance. This study with runners showed that they perceived hills as 50% steeper after they'd already run a while.
So fatigue can literally change our perception of the world.
And I did this little experiment in my lab, and we found that people's waist-to-hip ratio actually correlated with how far away they saw a finish line when carrying a weight.
That's what?
It's like our bodies are subconsciously influencing our perception of effort.
And that can have a big impact on things like exercise.
If you already feel out of shape, a workout might feel even harder just because of how you're perceiving it.
It can create a vicious cycle.
But here's the good news. If our perception is part of the problem, it can also be part of the solution.
How so?
Balcetis talks about this study where people walked to a finish line while wearing ankle weights.
Okay.
One group was told to focus intently on the finish line, like those marathon runners we talked about.
Narrowed focus.
The other group was just told to look around normally.
Control group.
And the results were incredible. The narrow focus group estimated the finish line to be 30% closer before they even started walking.
Wow, just by changing their focus.
And they ended up walking 23% faster, and they said the walk felt 17% easier.
That's a huge difference.
It's like by focusing on the goal, they actually made it easier to achieve.
The power of perspective.
And this isn't just about exercise. Chapter 8 applies this same idea to something we all struggle with: saving for retirement.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
The stats are pretty grim. Over 60% of Americans aren't confident they'll have enough saved for retirement.
That's a lot of people.
A quarter of working adults have no retirement savings at all.
Yikes.
And it's understandable. Retirement feels so far off, especially when you're young and just starting out.
It's hard to prioritize something that seems so distant.
So I tried this little experiment with some recent college grads. I used this software to age their faces, showing them what they might look like in retirement.
That's a creative way to make it feel more real.
The reactions were priceless. Some were amused, some were horrified.
I can imagine.
The interesting thing was, after seeing their older selves, almost all of them said they were more motivated to start saving sooner.
So connecting with their future selves made a difference.
And there's actual research to back this up. This guy, Hal Hirschfield, has done all sorts of studies on this.
What did he find?
Well, he showed people age-progressed images of themselves, and it increased their intentions to save for retirement.
Interesting.
He even did this virtual reality experiment where people embodied their older selves.
They were literally walking around as their future selves.
And they ended up allocating more money to retirement savings in the experiment.
That's pretty convincing.
And Prudential, the insurance company, even used this research in their ad campaigns.
To encourage people to save.
They had people imagine their savings successor, like the person who would benefit from their retirement funds.
That's clever.
It's all about making that connection to the future feel more immediate, more real.
Because if we see our future selves as strangers, we're less likely to make sacrifices for them.
And Chapter 9 takes this idea even further.
How so?
It looks at how connecting with our future selves can actually help us curb bad habits.
Oh, that's interesting.
It's particularly relevant for teenagers.
They're notoriously impulsive.
They have a hard time weighing short-term pleasures against long-term consequences.
It's all about the here and now.
My dad always says, if I knew then what I know now.
Right. We all have those moments of youthful indiscretion.
But Hirschfield did this study with high school students in the Netherlands.
What did he do?
He had them interact with avatars on a computer.
Okay.
Half the students got avatars that looked like their current selves.
And the other half?
They got avatars that were aged 15 years to look like their future selves.
I see where this is going.
And the students who interacted with their older avatars actually reported less delinquent behavior afterward.
Like less vandalism, less drinking.
Exactly. It was like seeing their future selves made them think twice about their actions.
It made the consequences feel more real.
And it's not just teenagers. There's research showing that connecting with our future selves can reduce procrastination in college students, encourage ethical behavior in business negotiations, even increase commitment to our jobs.
So it's a powerful tool for making better choices across the board.
Now, for the final chapter, Chapter 10, Balcetis takes us back in time to the 1950s, Montgomery, Alabama.
The civil rights era.
You've got segregation on buses, and Rosa Parks refuses to give up her seat to a white man.
A pivotal moment in history.
Her arrest sparked the Montgomery bus boycott.
Where thousands of African Americans refused to ride the buses.
For over a year, it crippled the city's public transportation system.
A powerful act of defiance.
The community rallied around the boycotters, organizing carpools, churches, collected shoes for people who had to walk miles to work.
It was a collective effort.
But there was also backlash. Bombings, assaults, arrests of civil rights leaders, including Martin Luther King Jr.
It was a dangerous time.
But through it all, the boycotters kept their eyes on the prize.
The goal of equality.
And there's this amazing song, I've Got My Hand on the Gospel Plow, written by Alice Wine.
Who was she?
She was a graduate of a voter education school on Johns Island, South Carolina.
What's the song about?
It's about perseverance, keeping your faith even when things are tough. It became an anthem during the civil rights movement.
It's about having that long view, that unwavering commitment to a better future.
And that's what Balcetis is saying in this final chapter. It's about remembering that our future, however distant it may seem, is a part of our here and now.
We can't just focus on the immediate gratification.
We have to keep our eyes on the prize, just like those boycotters did, just like Luke Aikens did, just like Joan Benoit Samuelson did.
It's about connecting with that future self and making choices that will benefit them.
So what did we learn today? Well, first off, our perception is not always reliable.
It's influenced by all sorts of factors, both internal and external.
And we can actually use that to our advantage.
By consciously changing our focus, our perspective,
We can make our goals feel more achievable, our efforts feel less daunting.
and our future selves feel more real, more worthy of our sacrifices.
We can set those appropriately challenging goals, find the right strategies, and then keep our eyes on the prize, even when things get tough.
It's about harnessing the power of perspective to achieve what we truly want in life.
Now, here's a final thought for you, our listener. Think about your own goals, your own challenges.
What might you be unknowingly widening your focus on?
What's your white light, and are you keeping it in your sights? What small shift in perspective could make your goals feel closer, clearer, more within reach?
The power is in your hands, your eyes, your mind.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Clearer, Closer, Better.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, keep those perspectives sharp and those goals in focus.